Hey everybody, good to be with you again for our next session. We are focusing on the theme of the wisdom of God, coming from the last lesson of the second unit. And as you can see on the screen, we are focusing on texts from John 16, 1 Corinthians 2, and Romans chapter 8. And of course, the theme here in this is the Spirit empowering. So it's kind of what we've been talking about collectively over the course of that entire unit, right? So by the time you get to it, it should make more sense that that's one of the unifying themes, if not the unifying theme. But now, tentatively, I'm titling this lesson New Covenant Promises, Life in the Spirit, and Wisdom. So, what I've done for you in the top blue boxes is giving you a snapshot of John chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17, very briefly, of course. But with those, cherry picked select verses out of each of them to show you that essentially the corridor of John chapters 13 up through 19, beginning of chapter 19, so really it cuts off at 18. What we're looking at here is a development of the new covenant as it's being laid out by Jesus. But of course, as Jesus is the one speaking it, it's really John who is putting together the sequence of the events for us, as he is essentially decided to skip going over the Lord's Supper as the other synoptic writers had done, and going at it from the angle of talking about what begins the supper with Jesus humbling himself to wash their feet, shocking them with the idea that their master is willing to serve, they should follow the example. And of course, the new covenant that Israel is waiting upon, that Jesus is the very fulfillment of and the arbiter of, is going to be the very conduit, the means by which they are going to be transformed so that they too will follow on in that particular example. And as you work through those chapters, what is happening here is that Jesus is essentially in these words, as John is also cherry picking and threading together these brief bits of discussion that Jesus is having in the probably hours long feast that transpired up in the upper room. And I would say hours long because if you go and try to harmonize the events of all the Gospels, there's a lot of room in there for a lot of things to happen. Lots of bits of discussion. There's reclining at the table, there's relaxation going on. There's enough time to elapse between Jesus making a proclamation somebody at the table was going to betray him. But of course, that will be the person whom he gives the piece of bread to, and nobody notices it, with the exception of maybe John, who Jesus told it would be the person he gives the piece of bread to, as others are discussing things amongst themselves. And at one point, they're talking about who's going to be the betrayer, and at other points, they're even arguing over who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Now, granted, that could have happened in a shorter time period than I'm proposing, but I doubt that's the case. Is that's awfully not the manner of Near Eastern types of communal feasting like this. It's meant to go on for hours. Jesus seems to abruptly cut it short when he tells them it's time to leave and then to go out to another place, which of course is going to be the garden. So all that to just point out the fact that there's lots of things going on here, and as Jesus is making this speech or series of speeches and answering the questions and statements his disciples are asking and making here, we're seeing that many things within the new covenant itself, as it was proposed by the Old Testament prophets, are being addressed. So, John chapter 14, actually, the first two blue boxes. First one is the glory of God is revealed. This is the very thing that was supposed to come after the exile is over with, which is where we begin with Isaiah chapter 40, right? Comfort my people Israel. Tell them their time of hard service is over with, meaning the exile is coming to an end. But as that passage in Isaiah 40 continues on, we know that the author says that the glory of God will appear, that all humanity together will see it because the mouth of the Lord has spoken and proclaimed this. Well, it's ironic, isn't it, that this is the very thing that Philip is asking of Jesus. Will you show us the Father? And Jesus says to him, the one who has seen me has seen the Father. But make no mistake, you have to be familiar with the preceding chapters of John to be able to catch what the significance is here in this, because Jesus has already addressed this a few instances, and John has made it a point to make sure that the readers understand this, that Jesus is indeed the very expression, the manifest glory of God, right? Because we get that in John 1:14 with him being the word that existed before all creation that is now tabernacled in human flesh, and we beheld his glory, right? And then, of course, John in John 6 is making it very clear that Jesus was the very one who was seated on the throne, high and lifted up, in the temple vision that Isaiah had. So I would even point out in the fact that this is a quotation from Andreas Kostenberger. In John 14, the disciple Philip asked Jesus to show them the Father, to which Jesus replies, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Andreas goes on to say, in the Old Testament, Moses asked for and was given a limited vision of God's glory. Isaiah, and in a like manner, Ezekiel was granted a vision of the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, Isaiah 6, verse 1. And later he predicted that in the day of the Messiah, the glory of the Lord would be revealed. So Messiah is that manifest glory. Of course, this means the new covenant has come because the new covenant would arrive when the exile in Babylon ended. Also in John 14, we understand that peace will come. Now, in the orange boxes, I'm giving you the quotations that Jesus speaks. First, I want to draw your attention to the black boxes. So in Isaiah 52, let me read this. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the herald who proclaims peace. Indeed, this is the gospel of the kingdom, that God reigns, salvation will extend forth from Zion to all the world. Or Ezekiel 37, where he says, again, the new covenant was announced in Ezekiel 36. The way in which it will come about is pictured for us through the resurrection of a dead army in Ezekiel 37 that all come to life when the Spirit is imparted, because that's what was promised with the new covenant. And he says, I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it will be a permanent covenant. I will establish and multiply them forever and set my tabernacling or temple presence amongst them, which of course Christ has done. Or Zechariah 9, a post-exile prophet. He says, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion, shout in triumph, daughter Jerusalem. Your king is coming to you, humble, riding on a donkey. That was fulfilled when Jesus went through the gates of Jerusalem, of course, at what we call the triumphal entry a week before his passion took place. Now, notice the oracle goes on. He says, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. The bow of war will be removed, and he will proclaim peace to the nations. So this is not an act of judgment per se against Ephraim and or Jerusalem. Ephraim being another term, synonym for the northern kingdom of Israel. It's just simply saying they will not strive with each other or with other enemies. Peace will now prevail. To break the war bow is to speak about what God did when he implemented the promise to Noah and all creation afterwards, when he hung his war bow in the sky, saying he would never take arms against them, again in the form of flooding the earth by water. So peace too is a term of the new covenant that Messiah will bring. Notice in John 14, Jesus says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. So John is telling us very keenly that Jesus is this covenant bringing peacemaker, right? John 15, the vine of Israel being renewed. Well, all three of these quotations here in the black boxes are all negative. From Isaiah 5, Jeremiah 2, Ezekiel 19, all of them referencing Israel as being a vine that the Lord had selected, pulling them out of Egypt, and of course, planting them in the vineyard he had plowed over for them, getting rid of all the weeds and everything that was there before, i.e., the nations of the Canaanites. And then after that, planting this select vine, expecting, per Isaiah 5, sweet grapes. Instead, he got sour grapes, and of course, turns this vineyard over to judgment. There's a reason why Jesus says in John 15, I'm the vine and my Father is the gardener. He's calling back to these passages, namely Isaiah 5, but of course, Jeremiah 2 and Ezekiel 19 or any other passage that references Israel as a vine. It's to say that now the vine is being renewed. That's what I'm focusing on. The vine is being renewed. Jesus is the true branch. The vine by which these branches are going to stem from. So the idea is that, of course, if Israel is being renewed in him, that must mean the new covenant is being brought forth again in real space and time. John 16, the Spirit of Yahweh given. So Jeremiah 31, and I'm going to mark out this top box. Apparently what I did here, and I didn't realize it until I was reviewing this to teach with you, is that I copied and pasted it twice. I guess I just like the second quotation a little better because I added on one additional sentence here at the end in my quotation of it. So really it's Jeremiah 31, Ezekiel 36, of course, the New Covenant passages. But what I will highlight to you there is both of them end with, I will be their God, they will be my people. Again, that's Exodus chapter 6 language. It's Exodus story language. It's speaking of the idea of the end of the final exile and the beginning of the final Exodus. And that means the Spirit of God, per the covenant terms by both of these prophets, are going to have to be enacted for that exile to come about. Well, look at what Jesus says. I have many things to tell you, but you can't bear them now. But when the Spirit of God or truth comes, he will guide you unto all truth. He's promising the very Spirit of God will come and will come soon because, of course, Jesus must depart and leave them soon. And then lastly, John 17, unity of Israel, or unity of the renewed Israel being revealed. Isaiah 11:2, speaking of a banner being lifted up for all the nations to gather the dispersed of Israel. But of course, before we get to that quotation, there's also a banner that's going to be lifted up for the nations, for them to come and rally around the Davidic descendant. Or Jeremiah 50, in those days and at that time, and this is the Lord's declaration, Israelites and Judeans will come together, weeping as they come. They will seek the Lord their God. They will ask about Zion, turning their faces to the road. They will come and join themselves to the Lord in a permanent covenant that will never be forgotten. This is the covenant spoken about here in Jeremiah 31. Point being is that now they will come together no longer fighting with one another, but be unified in this process. Now, who knows what tribes the 12 disciples descended from? And of course, Matthias now replacing Judas as one of the 12. We know Saul, who is also called Paul, is a Benjamite. But I would imagine, while we may not have all 12 tribes represented here, if there's at least one from each of the tribes represented, and what I mean by that is one from each of the tribes that become the separate nations of Israel, often referred to as Ephraim, and Judah represented here, then we have unification between the two houses of Israel and Judah together here. And I think we would definitely have something like that in play, symbolized in the disciples there. Zechariah 10, I will strengthen the house of Judah and deliver the house of Joseph. I will, and of course, Ephraim was the son of Joseph, so it's the northern kingdom of Israel. Restore them because I have compassion on them. They will be as though I never rejected them, for I'm the Lord their God and will answer them. Go back to what Jesus says in John 15, 1, 2. I'm the vine, you are the branches. My Father's garden, every branch think I just, man, I need to go back and fix that. Okay, I'm sorry. That should be a different quotation from John 17. Obviously, it's not from John 15. Let me see if I can isolate very quickly what I meant to bring up here. Uh, Obviously, it's one of the unity passages from John 17. So verses 20 through 21 would be good selections. I pray not only for these, but also for those who believe in me through your word. May they be one as you, Father, are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us so that the world may believe you sent me, right? So forgive me. There's always typos somewhere in these things. I should have done better. I will come the time that I actually teach this, right? So you might say, okay, I see that, but how does this filter into 1 Corinthians 2 and, of course, Romans 8? I've just quoted some passages here for you. The person without the Spirit does not receive what comes from God because it is foolishness to him. He's not able to understand since it is evaluated spiritually. Point being, the Spirit has to be the one who makes the difference by which we can discern spiritual truth. And the whole gospel in and of itself makes sense and becomes transformational and renewing in the life of the one who is bound to their sin, oppressed in their sin, still held in death and isolation from God in their sin, to then be awakened unto life. That cannot happen unless the Spirit does his job. I think that was part of the reason why these lesson writers wanted to link that in, is to show what Jesus is promising in the host text of John 16 with the arrival of the Spirit is what the apostle here is speaking or picking up on in 1 Corinthians 2. And the same thing is, it's the same writer in Romans 8, right? When he says, so then, brothers and sisters, we're not obligated to the flesh to live according to the flesh, because if you live according to the flesh, you're going to die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body. So, of course, it's the dichotomy. Do we continue to allow ourselves to be animating of our flesh? And what I mean by that is our flesh should be dead. We died to our flesh. But we animate it again when we choose to give ourselves over to those desires, when it whispers to us to lull us away from following and being in step with the Holy Spirit, and rather giving over to those carnal passions for the moment, to allow our dead flesh to have its moment of glory rather than the Spirit of God having his glory by virtue of him sanctifying us and pulling us away from those things. And the rest of what he goes on to say here speaks to that very concept. So hopefully that's helpful, all to bolster the idea the new covenant has indeed come through Jesus, and he's speaking quite heavily about it throughout the Gospel of John, and Paul will take up the matter later on when he writes to these additional churches. And of course, that would give us material to be able to speak on then to fill the rest of the lesson if there is some. So thanks for listening.